Alpine settings.
I'll follow my line and put it in the basket. That's it. Copy that. We've got the net form up here with the basket as well.
Everybody has to have a transceiver, a shovel, and a probe.
This is the Mountain Escapes Podcast, brought to you by the Backcountry Lodges of BC Association. Now, here's the host of the show, the Executive Director of the BLBCA and the owner of Call West Alpine Adventures, Brad Harrison.
Welcome to another episode of the BLBCA's Mountain Escapes. We are very pleased to be chatting with Jan Neuspiel, former owner of Island Alpine Guides, and he's based on Vancouver Island. He is also the newly minted coordinator of the Mountain Professional Critical Incident Stress Management Team. Welcome, Jan.
Hi, Brad.
So, Jan, we want to talk a bit today with you. Eventually we want to get to the Mountain Professional Critical Incident Team you're now are in charge of. But I want to go over a little bit of your background, which is very impressive, to say the least. Can you give a little bit of kind of your roots in this industry, where you started?
Well, I guess like a lot of us, I started by being a skier. I love to ski. I've skied since I was very small. And then ultimately moving to the mountains, to the Rockies as a teenager, and on seeing the mountains, falling in love with them and realizing that I was going to make my life in the mountains, becoming a climber in the process, and ultimately getting into guiding. And then early in my career, I was lucky enough to end up in the Himalayas and fell in love with that place really quickly, and ended up living in Nepal for 6 years, and then running a helicopter skiing operation in India for 11 years before sort of moving my operations back here to Canada and settling into a career here of guiding helicopter skiing in the Coast Range and running my own company, Island Alpine Guides.
Can you share some of your experiences working in Nepal and India, and how those would compare to your time in North America?
Yeah, it's a big question in a sense. The thing that comes to mind more than anything is the cultural context. That's what makes it interesting, for me anyway. Mountains are mountains. They have rock and snow and glaciers. And of course, the Himalayas are particularly large mountains, but they're still mountains. But the thing that makes working there really interesting for me is the cultural context. And that is both fascinating and exciting and warm and welcoming, and it's all kinds of things. And also, can be very challenging because it's such a different context. And especially with a heli-skiing operation, we were bringing some pretty Western notions of what the mountains are about to that setting, and that was really interesting and at times challenging.
Would you have some notable memories of, particularly of significant differences between the heli-ski operations you work with here in Canada and the ones over there?
Yeah, quite a few of those notables would come from experiences with the Indian bureaucracy. And finding myself with guests on site, ready to operate, and suddenly discovering that the civil aviation authorities have decided all my pilot's licenses were invalid. That'd be one example.
So what do you do then?
Oh, you send people to his house on the weekend to chat with him. That's what you do. It worked. Yeah, we sent some folks over to the Director General's office and had a word with him. And I mean, that one was actually relatively easy because we got caught in a net that wasn't meant for us. That it was a time when airlines were expanding, private airlines were expanding in India, regulations were opening up, and some foreign operators were taking advantage of that and having pilots in the country that didn't have the proper visas and so on. And so they just shut down foreign pilots. They just, they overreacted and said, okay, no foreign pilots flying in India. And we said, hold on, we've got all our ducks in a row. Our visas are correct. We have validated licenses, et cetera, et cetera. So we got caught in a net that wasn't meant to catch us. And we managed to get the right person and tell them that that's what had happened, and they sorted it.
That must be an amazing experience you'll probably never forget for the rest of the time. Do you have anything particularly interesting? I'm sure you had lots, but things that stuck with you from your time in Nepal?
That most of my memories of Nepal really stem from time in villages in the mountains with people. One of the realizations I had as I went along, I loved guiding peaks in Nepal. It was definitely a lot of fun, and To be clear, I guided the 6,000 meter peaks. I wasn't interested in the really high altitude stuff. It just seemed like as a guide, I wouldn't have enough control at those altitudes. But I liked guiding peaks, but I also discovered at one point that really what I liked was hanging out in villages with folks. I learned to speak the language while I lived in Nepal, and that obviously really enhances your experience of a place when you speak the language, and you can spend a night drinking and playing cards and having fun with people, in the mountains.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people come back from Nepal that have that very same sentiment. Just quickly back to the helicopter skiing in India. So where would your customers come from?
They were predominantly Europeans. So we in India were about the same distance from their doorstep as coming to a Canadian operation. So that lent itself well to them coming to us. And also, whereas the North American market was twice as far from us, which would deter people a bit. And also, I have to say that Europeans are generally, I think, more adventurous travelers and more up for an adventure in a place like India. One of our fastest growth markets was the British market. They're very keen skiers. The Ski Club of Great Britain is the largest and oldest ski club in the world. They kind of invented mountain tourism on some level in the Alps. And also they had a real affinity for India rather than a fear of it. So the Brits were a good market. And then we had lots of expats that were in Asian centers working in the banking sectors and that kind of thing, to whom we were very close. We're close to Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur and Tokyo and so on. So there were quite a few of them as well.
So then you ended up in Canada and you came out, back west and set up your Island Alpine Guides. Was that the name of your company?
That's right, yeah.
And what did that involve? Just skiing or?
No, it's sort of the full range of things that a mountain school and guide service does, So we were kind of like the little island version of Yamnuska or Canada West, doing our thing out here on the island, on the farthest western outpost of guiding and instruction in Canada on some level. And it started out really small, obviously with the usual things, avalanche training and guided backcountry skiing and guided alpine climbing and lots of mountain skills courses and rock climbing courses and that kind of stuff. And it grew into being a bit of a going concern here on the island. And until very recently, really didn't have any competition. We were the only show in town, which, 100% market share isn't a bad thing.
I know that Avalanche Canada and others kind of had left Vancouver Island out on its own. And thank goodness you were there to fill the void and carry Avalanche public bulletins to the recreationalists on the island for such a long time.
Yeah, it was me and another guy named Cliff Umpleby, who had recently moved to the island at the time and who I started Island Alpine Guides with and then soon thereafter bought out. And yeah, we just looked at it and thought, there's people recreating in the mountains on Vancouver Island in the winter, and there's avalanche hazard here, and that they need a bulletin. And so we started one and really ran it on the bake sale model for about 14 years with a lot of volunteerism and some really fun events that really brought together the mountain community to fundraise for the thing. We ran it on a bit of a shoestring, but it was a thing, and people used it and people appreciated it. And it became a bit of a focal point for the mountain community on Vancouver Island, which was super cool. And then, ultimately Avalanche Canada found enough money that they decided they would come in and include Vancouver Island in their offerings. And so I guess it's been 3 years now. I lose track, but something like that AvCan has been doing forecasts for the island.
I'm sure that all public winter recreationalists really appreciate the effort that you and Cliff put out to make that avalanche forecast available to them before Avalanche Canada took over.
British Columbia, Canada is a backcountry skier's paradise. With epic snowfall, vast alpine terrain, and cozy remote backcountry lodges. Your adventure begins here at backcountrylodgesofbc.com.
This is Mountain Escapes, brought to you by the BLBCA. We are chatting with Jan Neuspiel, the new CISM program coordinator. Welcome back. Jan, let's flip gears a little bit and go over to what's this CISM program all about? A lot of people might not be aware of it.
Fundamentally, what it's about is having trained peers, and I use the word peers because this is about folks going into a setting after a critical incident, when there's people have had traumatic experiences at work in the mountains, it's a peer who understands what these folks have been through because they're in the same industry doing the same stuff, and who's had some training in delivering what's sometimes called psychological first aid. So it's all about getting in there relatively quickly and really just giving people a chance to talk about their experience and the feelings that they're having after their experience, and normalizing those feelings for them. And there's a bunch of research that shows that the outcomes for people are way better when they have a chance to do that, they're more likely to sleep better and eat better and get along better and return to work sooner, and just have better outcomes after a traumatic incident when they have this kind of intervention. So this started coming on 4 years ago when HeliCat Canada initiated it, and then a whole bunch of other organizations jumped on board, that basically represent all the mountain professionals in the province. We had our first intake of peers to be trained more than almost 4 years ago. I was one of those people. And what we discovered was that the demand for it was way greater even than we had anticipated. And we were getting a lot of calls and doing a lot of interventions. And so another intake happened in a subsequent year. The teams continued to train and refresh and do its thing. And we're going to do yet another intake this next autumn. And more recently, rather than just running this off of the side of the desk at HeliCat Canada, 7 mountain professional organizations, and maybe I'll name them I hope I don't miss any: Canada West Ski Areas Association, HeliCat Canada, Avalanche Canada, Canadian Avalanche Association, Backcountry Lodges of BC, the Canadian Ski Guides Association, and the Association of Canadian Mountain Guides. I think I got them all. Is that right,
You
Brad?
did.
Oh, thank you. They all got together and formed a nonprofit that would now run this program and take it, to its next levels. And they hired a program coordinator, and that was me, I'm pleased to say.
Well, congratulations. I'm sure they're very glad to have you on board. How many peers would be available at a given time, and how, if somebody, I understand it's only employees or owners, how would they access those peers and say the time of need?
Yeah, so there's a phone number. Basically, we have a dispatch, and there's a phone number that is that's answered from, I can't remember the exact times, but it's sort of 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. or something like that. It's on our website, which is at MPCISM.ca, and they call that number, and then the dispatcher puts the call out to what is currently about 20 active peers, and we have an app that they use to respond, whether they're available to respond to this thing. And responses can be both virtual or in person, depending on what's indicated and what's possible. And then they'll assign a peer based on a bunch of criteria, such as their location and whether they're able to respond in person if that's what's needed. And also a little bit of where they sit in the industry and how that aligns with the people that they would be serving on that particular call.
So they try and match, like interests. Maybe, is that correct?
Yeah. So, for example, I'd often be called up for heli-skiing related stuff, being, on my 29th year of working in the heli-ski business, and other people that maybe are more involved in search and rescue or in ski areas or whatever it is. Yeah.
So the 20 peers, I don't know if you're allowed to share this number, but roughly how many interventions or incidents would they have had to respond to in the last 3 or 4 years?
So the number that I have in my head right now is for last year, for 2025. And I know that we served 139 individuals last year.
In 1 year?
Yeah. So they wouldn't have all been individual calls. Some of those people would have been part of a group intervention that we did and so on. But that number is stuck in my head because I wrote it somewhere recently. Yeah, 139 people.
And on I think you said 3 or 4 years this has been operating. Is that an average number, a high number, low number?
So the year before, 2024, was really similar. And the year before that was our first full proper year of operating, and that number was lower because we had just started out and awareness was growing about what we do. But I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact number.
How many times have you responded?
I think I've responded somewhere in the neighborhood of about 7 or 8 times and served, I don't know, a few dozen individuals in the process.
Wow, good for you. And this is kind of a personal question, so if you are uncomfortable answering, that's fine. Do you find those interventions, are they taxing on you emotionally?
They can be, for sure. Yeah, some more than others. Sometimes because they cut a little closer to the bone or a little closer to my own experience. I think one of the things that is worth saying here is that my finding has been that a lot of us that get involved in this work do so because we come from a time when this kind of support didn't exist. And we had traumatic experiences for which there was no support. Certainly that's what motivated me. When this came up, I immediately thought back to those times and how inadequate what we had to offer was, and I wanted to be involved in a better solution. And I think that's true for a lot of the people involved in this work. So it can be difficult. We do have really great supports in place for us as well. So we have some clinical counselors who are part of our organization, and I have certainly availed of their services both before and after difficult calls to make sure that I was looking after myself.
So those services, Jan, they would be say that the peer support, really wasn't enough. Then they have another place to go to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that's really important in this work is that we are certainly not counselors. We're not even close. It's a relatively short training, and it's not rocket science. It's quite simple on many levels. It's about listening. It's about normalizing reactions. It's about offering some advice and some next steps for people and helping them, understand what's happening with them. But it has a very tightly bound and well-defined scope because we have limited training. And as soon as we're feeling the edges of that scope, we have a list of resources of people that we can pass people on to, professionals, counselors, psychologists, that kind of thing. So that as soon as things are getting anywhere near the edge of what we can handle, we have places to send people.
Jan, I think this program is incredibly important and has been very successful to date. What do you see in its future, and why do you think it's really important?
Well, I think there's generally a really positive growing awareness in our society about emotional trauma, about how significant incidents can affect people emotionally, psychologically, and as a society, we're just paying a lot more attention to that, and I think that's a really positive thing. And I'm just really excited to be part of that in our industry, in the mountain industry. And I don't think it would surprise people to know that its history would have been one of it being I have my air quote fingers in the air here, a bit of a manly industry, that would have been all stiff upper lip when things went wrong, and you would just have to toughen up and everything would be okay. So, to have this happening where we recognize our fallibility and we recognize our emotional vulnerability and have ways of helping people through difficult circumstances, I think it's a super positive development, and I'm excited for it growing and becoming more available and better known as an option for people after a traumatic incident. I'm excited for the future of this organization and what it can do for people.
Jan, I think this program is incredibly important and has been very successful to date. What do you see in its future, and why do you think it's really important?
Yeah, so people that are either members of one of our member organizations or work for an employer who is a member, those are the people who we serve. We have to define a limit of some kind, or we might find ourselves overwhelmed. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't expand down the road, but we've just started this, so we're gonna. I think right now the direction I'm getting from our board is that we're going to stick with that and get that right, and then we'll see what the future holds.
Thanks very much, Jan, for spending some time with us. It's been amazing to hear about this program and your experience, all your experiences in the Far East and things like that. So thanks so much for your time.
It's been a real pleasure, Brad. Thank you.
This has been the BLBCA's Mountain Escapes. We have been fortunate enough to visit with Jan Neuspiel, CISM Program Coordinator. We thank you for listening in. Please take good care.
Mountain Escapes, brought to you by the BLBCA.